before we even look at the grammar feature that this video will focus on, I want to pause and remind you of some very, very basics of grammar and sentence structure. You already know that in English, the basic sentence structure is subject, verb, object, right? So in a simple sentence like this one, I love coffee, you can see that structure. You can see that there is a subject, the word I, there's a verb, love, and here there's an object too, coffee. So coffee is the thing I love, right? Or similarly, I might say coffee is my favorite thing. And here again, very simple structure. We've got a subject, coffee, the verb is, and here we've got what we would actually call a complement. So just, the rest of the sentence. But both of these examples, again, very simple sentences. We can identify in both of them subject, verb, and either an object or a complement. Notice that coffee in one sentence is the object, but in another sentence it can be the subject. And if we think even more basically about what kind of word coffee is, well, we know that coffee is a thing, right? So we'd say that it is a noun. And most of the time in any sentence, the subject or the object is going to be a noun. It's going to be a person or a place or a thing or an idea. But let's change these examples just slightly. So instead of I love coffee, what if I say I love drinking coffee? Still very simple, right? We've got the subject, we've got the verb, but the object is now this action. The thing I love is now the action of drinking coffee. Or I might say, drinking coffee is my favorite thing. So the verb is still is, but the subject is now this action, drinking coffee. So this is kind of strange. I mean, we've got an action here, drinking coffee, but it's not a verb. I mean, these sentences have verbs. Love is the verb in this one. Is the verb in this one. So it's funny because that action is being used. So drinking coffee, that action is being used where we'd usually see a noun. It's the object or it's the subject. So even though it is an action, a behavior, a habit, it is behaving in the way that a noun would behave. And so that is what we mean when we talk about gerunds. And gerunds are the subject of this short video. Often when I say the word gerunds, I think people's eyes sort of glaze over and people just don't remember what that word means or maybe never even heard it before. But that is okay because I can almost guarantee that you probably already know gerunds. You were probably already using gerunds. It's just that it is very easy to make a mistake with gerunds. And the most common mistake is simply forgetting to use one when we need it. So, this short video is just a little refresher and reminder about what a gerund is. Now, I'm going to show you a few examples that came from real student writing. Some of them might be from this class. So if you see one of your sentences, please don't be upset at all. I'm just choosing a few examples of a really common mistake. So let's take a look at this first one. Can you find a mistake in this sentence? It says, go to college is not a guarantee, but it's the best choice to be successful. If you'd like, pause the video and think, what is the mistake? The answer is we should have said, going to college is not a guarantee, but it's the best choice to be successful. How about this next example? Online friendships can be fun, but it's different from be together in person. We should have said, it's different from being together in person. And one more example. Can you find the mistake here? Based on my experience, I recommend to go to college. It should have said, I recommend going to college. So now all three of these examples, if you think about it, they're different sentences, different ideas, but what do they all have in common? Well, they all needed a gerund, but they didn't use a gerund. So that's the mistake. Let's talk for just a second about how we do that. How do we use a gerund? What does it look like? So structurally, what is a gerund? It is simply a base verb plus ing. Every single verb in English has a gerund form. You can use every verb in English as a gerund. So no matter what the verb is, if the verb is be, the gerund is being. Think, the gerund is thinking. Study, the gerund is studying. Or one of our vocabulary words, compliment, complimenting. This is true with phrasal verbs too. So those verbs that have, more than one word part. Look up, the gerund would be looking up. So notice we're just taking that base verb plus ing. And again, we can do this with any verb in English at all. But that raises the question, why would we do that? Well, remember, as I said, a gerund is an action, but it is not acting as a verb in the sentence. Instead, it's acting like a noun. It's doing what a noun would do. Now, we often use a gerund, for example, as the subject of a sentence. So when an action or an activity is the subject of a sentence. So that's something like going to college is not a guarantee. Here the subject would be going to college, and the verb is not, is not. Also, we often need to use a gerund after a preposition. When I say preposition, I'm talking about those little teeny tiny words in English that you see all the time, like in, on, with, at, about, for, of, or from. So, for example, it's different from being together in person. From is a preposition, and then this gerund, being together in person, sort of becomes part of that kind of preposition phrase. Also, we often need to use a gerund as the object of a sentence, but only after certain verbs. Other verbs don't require that, and that's okay. There's a reference sheet in this module. But what I mean is, for example, in the sentence, I recommend going to college. Well, we would not say, I recommend go to college or I recommend to go to college. And that's because the verb recommend just kind of has that pattern of using a gerund after it. Now, again, I've included a reference sheet in the course module which lists some common verbs like recommend, which are often accompanied by a gerund. I am not suggesting that you go memorize that. That would be very boring and difficult to do. And also, it's just not, a complete list of every verb. It's just a pretty good starting point of a lot of really common verbs. So I would suggest as you're doing the practice, as you're working in your own writing, um, check that list, find the verb you're using, and if it's on the list, it might need a gerund. But a few more things to keep in mind. Keep in mind, for one, that gerunds can also be made negative simply by adding the word not. So I could say not going to college is a good decision for some people. So notice the subject there is not going to college and the verb is. Or my doctor recommends not smoking. Or I worry about not passing my classes. Also, if a gerund is the subject of a sentence, it's always considered singular. Now, remember, in English, we kind of need to match the subject and its verb. So a singular verb is something like he or she or it. So we'd match it with a singular verb like, is. But a plural verb would be something like we or they, and we'd use the verb are. Well, you can treat gerunds, when they're the subject of a sentence, as a singular verb. So in the same way that you would say, like, it is a good decision for people, we could say not going to college is a good decision for some people. Or using transitions and topic sentences is something I want to work on. Now, this is an interesting one because often when we're thinking about how to match our verb, we tend to look at what came just before. And so we see this plural item, sentences, and it's tempting to say are something I want to work on. But here, the subject really is using. So using these two things is something I want to work on. Or being on time is important. Or reading helps increase your vocabulary. And one more thing to mention, gerunds always end in ing, but it's worth pointing out that not all ing words are gerunds. You guys know by now, I'm sure, English can be a little bit crazy sometimes. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how it might feel a little bit crazy. In this sample sentence, painting is challenging, we see here two ing words, right? Here, painting is a gerund. So we've got that action of painting as the subject of a sentence, right? The verb is, but challenging is not a gerund. This is actually just an adjective. Or how about this one? I'm painting a picture. Well, here, painting is a verb. It's part of that continuous, that present continuous am painting. So even though it ends in ing, it's not a gerund. One more example. Taking a painting class is interesting. Look at all those INGs, but not all of these are gerunds. Now, the first one, taking, that's a gerund. It's an action, right? But here, painting is an adjective that describes class. And interesting is also an adjective which describes this whole activity of taking a painting class. So, something to keep in mind, not all ing words are gerunds. We really have to pay attention just to the content, what's going on, how the action's being used in that context. Next, I'm going to ask you to do a short practice with gerunds and ultimately to be mindful of this in your own writing. But in the practice, you'll see two parts. In the first part, you'll be asked simply to complete a sentence like this one using a verb that is given in parentheses. So to complete this sentence, something healthy matters more than everything else, you'd simply use the gerund. Staying healthy matters more than everything else. Part 2, you'll be given a sentence and asked to find a mistake. For example, this sentence, it says, I truly consider that have a successful life is more than obtain an associate's or bachelor's degree. Actually, there are two mistakes here. It should have said, I truly consider that having a successful life is more than obtaining an associate's or bachelor's degree. So we need two gerunds there. As you work on that homework, be sure to use that gerunds reference sheet any moment where you're just not sure about the verb you're using and whether or not it needs a gerund.